the coldest night on record. Frank Calloway's grand house sat dark and frozen, windows frosted from the inside.
This house is a sieve, the best timber money can buy, and I am freezing.
Across the valley, Thomas Alder's cabin glowed warmly, its thick plaster walls holding steady heat. 3 months earlier, Thomas stood at the lumber mill, staring at a pitiful stack of planks.
There has to be more timber. I can't build a house with this.
A house of straw? You'll be living in a barn, Alder, and a cold one at that.
I heard the town laughing, but I also saw your hands moving. Show me what you need.
Straw bales, clay, and a strong back. We start today.
And so they began stacking golden bales, while the town passed by with narrowed eyes.
They'll see. Walls don't need to be thin to be strong.
Day after day, Thomas and Susan stacked bales tighter than cords of firewood, the town's laughter trailing behind them.
A barn can be stacked high, Alder, but it won't keep a man warm. You are building a monument to foolishness.
Better a warm barn than a frozen palace built on hot air.
Susan mixed the first batch of clay in a wooden trough, her arms coated gray to the elbow.
Work it until it's smooth as butter. Then pack it deep into every seam until the wind has no path.
He troweled the thick plaster onto the bale wall, sealing every gap with a craftsman's patience.
Plaster won't stop the rot, Alder. Straw pulls moisture from the air like a sponge.
Let every tongue wag. The first cold night will settle every argument better than I ever could.
By the end of the week, the cabin stood fully formed, its golden core hidden beneath a thick gray coat of clay.
This will be the easiest winter of my life, watching that pile of hay collapse under the first real snow.
Once the plaster cured hard as stone, Thomas pried loose a small sample and handed it to Susan.
Clay seals the straw from air. No air, no fire. The packed bales won't burn like loose hay.
But what if moisture seeps in? Frank swears rot will hollow these walls from the inside out.
Feel this. Harder than old pine. The plaster breathes moisture out. It won't trap it inside.
The first true cold night descended without warning, cutting through every crack the town's builders had ignored.
I barely fed the stove, and it's warm as a spring afternoon in here.
3 logs an hour, and this cursed place still breathes like cheesecloth. See this? Straw burns like dry tinder. One stray spark and that cabin will be a pillar of flame.
Half the town now believes we're sleeping inside a bonfire, waiting to happen.
But as the cold settled in, Thomas's little cabin asked for less and less, while the big houses hungered for more. The rumors grew louder.
Tomorrow at noon, bring your buckets and your eyes. I'll prove this plastered haystack is a death trap.
Thomas didn't hesitate. He welcomed the crowd to his cabin, trusting the walls to speak for themselves. A man heaved 3 gallons of water against the plastered surface. The water beaded and sheeted off like a waxed cloak.
That's impossible. It should have soaked right through. Surface water means nothing. The real enemy is moisture trapped inside. It'll rot the straw before spring.
What if he's right, Thomas? What if the dampness is hiding where we can't see?
Then we open a wall and look. The plaster breathes. There won't be any dampness.
They cracked a small inspection hole. Right then, golden straw, bone dry, fell out like chaff.
A trick. Probably dried before we looked. Give it time. Every wall has its secrets.
But the crowd left quieter, their doubts shifting. Winter was not yet done with them. As the freeze tightened, households began measuring firewood like rations. Thomas's stack barely shrank.
Mrs. Harper told me she used half her wood in a week, while our stove barely sips.
The walls hold the heat in. Timber can't do what thick straw does.
At Frank Calloway's grand house, the pipes froze solid. His wife wrapped blankets around the sink.
It's a fluke. The cold came from the ground this year. Nothing to do with the walls.
Inside the straw cabin, Susan held her hand an inch from the wall. No chill radiated back. Late one night, a shadow crossed the yard. A neighbor pressed his palm against the plaster, then nodded slowly.
They're starting to believe, even when they won't admit it.
You think a warm cabin makes you a builder? One swallow doesn't make a spring.
But the first swallow had arrived, and the valley was watching. Frank hauled a small mock-up wall into the town square, plastered like Thomas's cabin, and called for torches. He pressed the flame to the clay until it glowed red. The plaster charred black but gave nothing to the fire.
It won't catch. Even after everything I said, it won't catch.
The crowd rustled, impressed murmurs rising. Frank's face twisted. He could not let this stand.
You doctored that plaster. No simple clay repels flame. This is a cheap sideshow.
You demanded a test. It failed. Now you call it fake. Just say it. You can't stand being wrong.
You think I am afraid of a haystack? I've built more houses than your brother has hairs on his head.
Then why are you so desperate to tear his down? What are you afraid people will see?
Frank had no answer. The silence was worse than any fire. The town watched him swallow his pride and say nothing. But in his mind, a darker resolve was hardening. He would not be made a fool by walls of straw. The cold deepened until breath froze on the air. Frank found a new fear to whisper into the ears of the doubting.
That plaster sweats when it's cold. The moisture has nowhere to go. It'll freeze inside the straw and rot it from the core.
Now he's saying the cold itself will destroy it. People are listening, Thomas.
Then we'll look at the very spot he claims is rotting. Cut open the north wall after the next heavy frost.
After 3 nights of biting cold, they cut a careful square in the north plaster, where any condensation should have hidden. The plaster fell away. Inside, the straw was dry as August hay, golden and clean.
Not a speck of damp. It's perfect. He was wrong again.
The plaster breathes. It pushes moisture out, not in. That's why the cabin warms so easily.
Word reached Frank before sunset. His jaw tightened, but he offered no new argument. Only a silence that spoke of defeat. The cabin stood untouched by fire, water, or frost, and the man who had called it a barn was running out of lies. A wealthy land buyer from the eastern county arrived unannounced to inspect Frank Calloway's premium house.
No expense spared. Solid oak, double-framed, as fine a home as any in the territory.
But the buyer drew his coat tighter and stated flatly, he'd never felt such a draft from supposedly sealed walls. He demanded to see the straw bale cabin that now commanded the valley's quiet attention. Inside Thomas's cabin, the man held his hand near the plaster and stood still, waiting for a chill that never came.
It's not magic. Just thick walls and tight seams. A man with a few bales and clay can do it for 1/10 the timber.
The buyer didn't haggle. He put down a deposit on a new straw bale house. That same afternoon, Frank received the news in silence. His finest work had been rejected for a barn that wasn't even for sale. That evening, alone with a bottle, Frank stared at the frost forming on the inside of his own window.
They'll learn. Straw can't stand against a true winter. One good soak, and it'll rot from the inside. I'll make sure of it.
Under a moonless sky, Frank carried a drill and a canteen to the back of the straw bale cabin.
A little water where it can't dry. That's all it takes.
The next morning, Thomas knelt at the base of the wall, his fingers tracing a dark, damp stain spreading across the plaster.
Susan, look at this. Someone put water inside the wall, right where rot would start.
Sabotage? Who would do such a thing?
Only one man has reason to see this cabin fail, but I have no proof.
That evening, Thomas mixed a thick batch of clay by lantern light and sealed the wound with deliberate care.
If they wanted rot, they'll need more than a few cups of water. The plaster breathes it out.
The sabotage left no lasting harm, but Thomas's eyes now searched the darkness, each night with a heavier watchfulness.
Could it be Frank?
A chilling report swept the valley. The coming winter would be the coldest anyone had ever measured.
This is the storm that will bury his haystack. The freeze will crack that clay, and the straw will spoil like old grain.
Thomas responded without words. He mixed fresh clay and spread a second skin over every inch of the exterior.
I am going to keep a log. Temperature outside, wood consumed, everything. Let the number speak.
Frank walked past the cabin as the second coat dried, his laughter carrying across the field.
Painting a tomb, Alder. That won't stop winter.
The only answer that matters will come when the wind stops screaming.
The sky curdled gray, and the first hard flakes began to fall. By nightfall, the valley was white, and the wind had teeth. Inside the plastered walls, Thomas banked the stove and listened to the storm. For 3 days, the blizzard scoured the valley with winds that screamed like wounded beasts.
I had to crack the window this morning. It's almost too warm in here.
The walls are doing their work. Just a little wood, and the heat stays put.
At Frank Calloway's house, the roof groaned. Shingles peeled away like pages torn from a book. An upstairs pipe froze and burst, flooding the bedroom floor with icy water. His wife, shivering in blankets, begged him to swallow his pride and go to the straw cabin. He wouldn't.
I'll freeze in my own house before I knock on that door. This is a real home, not a barn.
Through the long nights, the wind hammered, but inside the plastered walls, Thomas and Susan slept in peace. On the 4th morning, the storm broke. A white silence buried the valley 3 feet deep. Thomas dug a path to his door. The cabin stood untouched, its thick walls holding fast. As the town dug out, the contrast was undeniable. Thomas's cabin stood pristine and warm, while Frank's porch had collapsed. By noon, the town council arrived at the straw bale cabin, their faces etched with curiosity and doubt.
You are welcome to see the wall for yourselves. I'll open it right here.
He pried a section loose. Inside, the straw was golden and bone-dry, as if packed that morning. A councilman ran his fingers through the straw, then turned to his colleagues in disbelief.
The councilman muttered, "Not a trace of damp. After that storm, it's nothing short of a miracle."
Outside, Frank watched through the frosted window of his damaged house, his face a mask of bitter silence. The head of the council turned to Thomas, his voice carrying the weight of official approval.
Mr. Alder, this method has proven its worth. The council will formally recommend straw bale construction.
Frank's empire of timber had crumbled in a single winter, leaving him alone with the echo of his own mockery. The council's endorsement spread Thomas's method like a wildfire. Frank's premium house sat vacant, creditors circling.
Alder stole my business. That haystack ruined me.
Frank stormed to the lumber mill, found a plastered bale, and struck a match against its surface. The clay charred black. The straw beneath would not ignite, the same fire he had mocked months earlier. A worker saw the smoke and shouted. Townsfolk gathered, their expressions shifting from confusion to disgust.
It should burn. This is a trick, I tell you.
They pulled the matches from his hand. Frank Calloway, once the master builder, was led away in shame.
Timber prices lock out the poor. What if we taught them straw bale building?
Then let's start. The knowledge was never ours to keep.
That evening, Susan sketched plans for a workshop while the disgraced builder disappeared into his cold, empty house. Thomas found Frank sitting alone in his cold parlor, the ashes of last night's fire long dead.
I didn't come to gloat, Frank. I came to offer a way back.
I drilled that hole, Alder. I poured the water. I tried to burn it. It was all me.
I know. The plaster held anyway. Let me teach you how to build something that really lasts.
Why would you help me? After everything I did.
Because a man can change his walls, but only if someone shows him how.
No one is priced out of warmth. We'll teach you to build walls that hold the heat.
By Monday, Thomas had Frank stacking bales alongside him, the former builder's hands learning a new craft.
I spent my life building with wood and never knew a wall could breathe like this.
The town watched with cautious hope as the first straw bale workshop took shape, a new chapter unfurling like a plastered wall. By Monday, the workshop grounds buzzed. Susan had gathered widows, a farmhand, and a young couple with nothing but hope.
You don't need wealth, just bales, clay, and willing hands. Let's begin.
Frank stood at the edge, watching Thomas stack bales with the hands that once held a drill.
What do you want me to do? I've never built a house like this.
Start with the clay. Pack it tight and feel how it locks the heat.
By week's end, the little house stood complete, a warm shelter born from straw and community.
One widow grabbed my hand, crying. She said, I never thought I'd sleep in a home that wasn't cold.
Word spread fast. Before Susan could breathe, a dozen more families asked to learn.
Pride kept me cold for years. This clay, it's warmer than I ever was.
Frank, once a builder of luxury, now tasted the purpose of building for those in need.
Alder, that house of mine is still empty. What if we reclad its north wall with straw? Show people old timber can be fixed.
Then let's do it. Your own house will become the best proof that no wall is too far gone.
Within days, they stripped Frank's north wall to its frame, exposing every draft that had ever leaked through. Thomas's crew packed straw bales tight against the sheathing, then covered them with thick clay plaster. The moment the plaster dried, the coal that had always seeped through simply stopped. The county buyer who'd once shivered in that very parlor returned with an offer before the week was out. The buyer shook Frank's hand and named a fair price, but Frank paused before signing.
Take half the profit for the workshop. I don't deserve it, but these walls do.
This will build walls for 10 families. Your past is buried deeper than winter snow.
With the sale closed and the workshop funded, Frank Calloway finally built something that lasted a second chance. 1 year later, the valley wore a new skin. A dozen straw bale homes glowed through the snow, each one a quiet rebuke to old mockery.
A year ago, this path was a joke. Now 10 families have a roof that doesn't steal their sleep.
Frank Calloway, once the valley's fiercest skeptic, now spent his days on a scaffold, troweling clay with the hands that once held a drill. Susan's workshop had become a permanent school, training a new generation in the craft that needed no timber fortune. Thomas's first cabin still held heat better than any, but it was no longer a curiosity. It was the start of a village. Frank and Thomas, once enemies, now stood together at the scaffold. Two builders with different pasts and one shared craft.
I called it a barn. Now I can't imagine living in anything else.
Next week's class is full, and the week after, the poor are finally building their own walls.
They laughed at a house of straw, but straw never laughed back. It just kept them warm.
And as the second winter passed, with the same quiet warmth, the valley understood that the house of straw had outlasted every sneer. When the valley's fuel logs were tallied after the second winter, the town council published a report no one expected. Thomas Alder's straw bale cabin had consumed less than a quarter of the firewood of any plank house in the valley.
Numbers don't lie. The walls did the work.
The house I couldn't sell. Now it's the second warmest in the whole valley.
Frank's house once froze its pipes. Now it's second only to ours. That's the real twist.
The report spread like a verdict. Thomas's cabin was officially the warmest building in town, using a fraction of the timber. Men who had laughed at the barn now came to study its seams, asking to be taught.
I built a monument to my own pride, and a house of straw outlasted it.
They laughed at a cabin built from straw, until the coldest winter left it warmest.
The house of straw had become the warmest building in town, and the proof was written in the ashes of every cold night. The families who had bought Frank's cold plank houses now knocked on his door, demanding the warmth the report promised.
You are right. Those walls were my pride, but they stole your comfort. I'll fix them at cost. No profit.
Thomas and Susan arrived without being called, trowels in hand, ready to clad the old timber in straw. Day after day, they wrapped plank houses in the same method Frank once scorned, sealing every draft with clay.
I spent a lifetime building walls that leaked winter. Now I am sealing them with the very hay I mocked.
The irony hung over every scaffold. The man who had resisted straw was now its most determined apostle.
Every trowel of clay you spread undoes a wrong, Frank. You are building more than walls.
An old plank house, once known for its drafts, stood transformed with a golden straw skin beneath fresh plaster.
The barn I ridiculed taught me the only skill that could save my name.
By spring, Frank had retrofitted a dozen homes, and not a single family complained of cold again. By midsummer, Susan's straw bale school had a roof of its own, and the waiting list stretched into the next county. Thomas refused every offer of payment. His cabin, a free demonstration site for anyone willing to learn. A traveling journalist arrived one evening, notebook in hand, asking for the straw builder's story.
The walls speak for themselves. I only gave them a voice.
The journalist stayed 3 days, measuring walls, watching workshops, and recording every story of cold homes made warm. The article ran in 3 county papers under the headline, "The House of Straw That Outlasted Winter." Letters arrived from distant valleys, asking for patterns, for a teacher, for the secret of walls that held the heat.
Even the town that laughed is building straw now. The waiting list is 60 families long, Thomas.
I never wanted fame. I just wanted walls that kept people warm.
And the valley watched as the quiet builder who had asked for nothing became the teacher of a region. On the anniversary of the coldest night, Thomas Alder sat alone in the cabin that had been called a barn. He struck a match and lit a single candle, the flame steady in the breathless air.
The same night a year ago, the wind was a knife. Tonight, it doesn't even whisper.
He touched the plaster wall. It was warm, as if the straw inside still held the autumn sun. A small fire crackled in the stove, more for company than need.
Walls don't forget, but they don't have to hold the cold.
Rising, he crossed to the window and peered out at the dark valley. A dozen other straw bale homes glowed in the night, each window a small promise kept.
They laughed. Then winter came, and the House of Straw was the only one still smiling.
He let the curtain fall and returned to his chair, the weight of years lifting into the quiet. The camera pulled back from Thomas's window, rising above the snow-covered valley. Below, more than a dozen straw bale homes dotted the landscape, each one glowing like a small sun in the winter dark. At Susan's workshop, the lamps burned late as she taught an evening class, her hands still gray with clay. A new generation of builders listened, their faces eager, their homes already warm. Frank Calloway closed the door of a retrofitted home, the latch clicking against the stillness. He hung his coat by the door and touched the plastered wall, feeling the heat it held. The valley stretched out in perfect silence. No drafts, no frozen pipes, only the quiet proof of walls that kept their promise, and the wind that had once mocked a barn of straw now passed over without a sound. They laughed at a house of straw, but the winter wind never did again.